Eddie Schneider is a charismatic and successful creative director at an advertising agency in New York. He's also engaged to the boss's daughter Jude, and everything seems to be going his way, but Eddie has this one dark secret in his life, which is his addiction to sex, which causes him to lead a life of deceit and lies. Next, we see Eddie leaving his house for an important meeting with a huge client for the agency, but he decides to take a quick trip to visit his mistress to satisfy his urges, and he was late for the meeting. Meanwhile, at the agency, things were heating up as Eddie was nowhere to be found. The boss arrives and the meeting starts, and Eddie, who was still caught up in traffic, tells his secretary to cover for him as he comes up with a brilliant scheme to devise a plan to relate his tardy arrival with his pitch. When the clients were just about to leave, Eddie arrives and saves the day, making a winning pitch. Angela, a co-worker and friend of Eddie, who is his only female friend that has no sexual past with him, is seen celebrating the win with Eddie. She seems like a decent young woman, but carries a troubled past. She was raped brutally by 4 men when she was just a young girl, and she calls him out for what he did at the meeting. He changes the subject and tells her that he's marrying Jude, and she then goes on to tell him that she's happy for him. He tells her that he's very happy that they are friends, and that nothing between them happened despite his reputation with women. While they were on the subject of women, she tells him to stop cheating on his wife and tells him to get serious with his life. Wait, hold on. Did you subscribe to our channel? Come on guys, you're here, you're watching the video, help us out by hitting the subscribe button as it really helps out me and my team to make more videos for you guys. And now, let's get back to the recap. Back at the office, Eddie is met with more good news about the pitch that he made earlier, and the agency got the contract and he's named partner at the agency. All seemed well, but Judy was starting to notice some things about Eddie as he was about to wash his clothes. Eddie pretends to go jogging in the morning, but instead, he actually goes to his mistress. He tells her that this was the last time, and meanwhile, the suspicious Jude goes out to jog by herself in search of Eddie, but didn't really manage to find him. At night, Eddie was seen having a conversation with Anthony, Jude's brother, and a serial rapist who managed to avoid being convicted because of his family. He wanted to know about the real reason why Eddie was late in the morning, but Eddie dismisses him, telling him that he doesn't know what he's talking about. On the same night, Angela was about to go home, but she forgets her keys. She gets back to the office, only to be met by Anthony, and he confronts her and insinuates that she and Eddie have this intimate relationship. She tries to convince him that they're just friends, but he turns on her and forces himself on her, and Angela is then assaulted a second time in her life. Terrified and afraid, she showers and cleans up, and as she approaches her car, she breaks down and cries in agony. On the next day, Eddie arrives early to work, and then just as he parks his car, he finds Angela crying on the floor. Eddie finds out about Anthony and begins to rage about what he would do to him, but Angela asks him to take her to the hospital as she was bleeding. At the hospital, Eddie meets his former lover from 4 years ago, Eve, who's now a doctor at the hospital. She tells him that Angela is showing signs of trauma, and she asks him about what happened to her. Eddie tells her that one of the partners at the company did this, and he says that he's just a co-worker, but somehow Eve didn't believe him, knowing what she knows about his past. He goes inside to check on Angela, who is now passed out from all the sedatives. After seeing her like that, filled with anger, he goes to Anthony and starts confronting him about what he did to Angela. But Anthony, who already knew about Eddie's infidelity, blackmails him with a list of photos implicating him of having an affair. Back at the hospital, the police have gotten the report from Eve, and the already terrified Eddie starts to distance himself. The detective on the case tells Angela to be strong as there's going to be a court case. Since Angela destroyed the evidence of rape when she was washing, the detective suggests that Eddie could testify, and after hearing that Angela doesn't want to spend the night alone, the detective takes her to a Catholic home of Sister Meryl. Angela, on her way to the police station, calls Eddie, but he ignores it, and the detective on the case, Detective Drake, introduces himself and asks Eddie to testify, but their conversation is cut short when Russell, the father of Anthony and the owner of the agency, arrives. The detective alerts Anthony and his father about the case that's now ongoing on Anthony. They then ask her to leave since she didn't really have a search warrant. warrant. Meanwhile, Zinski, a well-known attorney who defends criminals, is hired by Russell. Zinski presents his plan to use Angela's history in the psychiatric private clinic after being raped the first time to make sure Anthony doesn't see the inside of a cell. And he mentions that only one obstacle stood in their way. Anthony already had a previous case associated with an underage girl that was 17 years old. But he assures Russell that their defense is going to be solid and there was nothing to worry about. While all of this was happening, Eddie couldn't say anything but could hear all of it with his head down. What was worse was that the lawyers asked Eddie to lie on the stand about the night Angela was raped, and Jude, who saw the lawyer come in, started to ask Eddie about the case. In the middle of their conversation, Eddie tells Jude that he's going for a run later, which confirms her suspicion that she has about him lying. The day before the trial, Eddie's confronted by the detective and is asked to tell the truth about the night Angela was attacked. She tells him that she's suspicious that Eddie might be leaning toward the family for the sake of money, but he dismisses her, saying that she doesn't know him enough to say that, and stressed about the trial, he didn't sleep until later that night. He goes on trial and testifies that he left the parking lot with Angela behind him, and on the cross-examination he also lied when the company was going to fire her because of the false allegation. And just to get back at him, Angela lied about having an affair with Eddie. During the cross-examination, the lawyer accused her issue of accusing men when things don't go her way, and he used her statement that she gave when she was young about seeing a black general who shot and killed the ones that raped her. And just as he planned, he used her time at the psychiatric clinic to discredit her testimony, claiming that she's mentally unstable. And because of this, Anthony was found not guilty. Eddie, feeling stressed out by everything, calls his mistress, and like he always does, he tries to pretend to go out for a run. But Jude was there and they go running, and she tells him that she knows about the affair that he's been having, and she tells him that it's all over between them. Things then go downhill for Eddie, and Russell and Anthony tell him that since he was not part of the family anymore, he couldn't be partner at the company, and he eventually gets fired. And the only thing that he had left was a severance package of $200,000, even though the company was valued at $20 million. Angela was deeply hurt by this, and she asks Sister Muriel how this could happen to her twice in her life, and they got away both of the times. The sister answers her questions, saying that they will eventually pay for it, and as soon as she leaves, Angela tries to off herself, but she's interrupted by the Black General, who's a figment of her imagination that was created to protect her. The Black General tells her to get rid of the psychiatric meds and to be ready to do some work, and with the help of her imaginary friend, she gets out to get her revenge for what happened to her. She's then seen buying a few drugs and a gun from the street. Jude, who has now opened her shop, is trying to move on and gets a visit from Eddie. Eddie confesses everything to her, and she tells him to take responsibility for what happened. She asks him if he's ever slept with Angela, and he tells her why she lied about having an affair. She was disturbed, and she leaves him where he was sitting, and having nothing going for him, Eddie goes to a club to get drunk, where he meets up with Anthony. After getting taunted, Eddie gets into a fight with Anthony, and he punches him until he's forced out by the club's security guard. The drunk Eddie then leaves and goes to Jude, and he apologizes to her and takes her keys, and she allows him to spend the night, but tells him that he will leave immediately in the morning. Angela, who had been planning her revenge from the start, arrives at the club, and she wears a wig and enters without being noticed. She then drugs Anthony and takes him into her car, and she confronts him about what he did to her. She takes a brutal revenge on both Anthony and Eddie, as she first physically beats him, and then she handcuffs him to the steering wheel and grapes him with a strap on. She then takes the last straw by shooting him in the head and killing him instantly. As for her revenge on Eddie, she orchestrates the crime, planting his fingerprints on the body of Anthony, and she does one final thing that puts her suspicion by the police and everyone around her, and she goes to Anthony's funeral to see the look on his parents' face. After the service, two police officers begin to question why she came to the funeral and the whereabouts of Angela the night Anthony died. She starts to lose words to explain, but unexpectedly, Sister Evelyn covers for her, saying that they were together that night. Eddie, not knowing about being set up by Angela, is arrested at a presentation where he was trying to restart his career. The police then tell him that they're pressing charges and that he's actually getting charged for the murder of Anthony. With all the evidence pointing toward him, Eddie was about to go to jail for 20 years for a crime that he didn't even commit. He meets Angela at the prison and he asks for her forgiveness. During their conversation, she admits to killing Anthony and he begs her to confess so he can go free, but she tells him that she needs to live her life freely after all that she endured. The next thing we see is the trial starting, and during the trial, a lot of evidence was presented by the prosecutor. The photo Anthony used to blackmail Eddie. The photo showed Eddie out with a lot of women, and the investigator Anthony hired corroborates this truth about the blackmail. Eddie is then left with one choice: to testify that Angela confessed in prison to be the killer of Anthony. His lawyer advised him to do that, but when the time came to take the stand, he couldn't do it, and it seemed that his fate was after all sealed. Jude unexpectedly takes the stand and testifies that Eddie was really with her at that night, and that Anthony raped a lot of women, including herself, when she was 15 years old. She tells the jury that she kept it quiet because her family insisted on standing together, and Eddie was set free, and he thanked Jude for what she did for him, and both of them go their separate ways. I hope you guys enjoyed the recap. Make sure to leave me a like, leave a comment, also subscribe to my channel. I love you guys so much, and I promise to see you on my next recap. Bye!